Good morning, everyone. I'm going to take a few liberties today because, as many of you know, later this afternoon I'm going to be taking a plane to Bangalore, and I'll be gone for about 8 weeks on a lecture tour in India, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And just to make it all more interesting, that everything happens at the same time, as most of you know, we've been making this movie about Ananda. A few weeks ago we had the camera crew here, and we had the fun of having our Sunday service be filmed and have the cameras creeping around while we all attempted to behave in a totally natural manner. And the process of making that film is moving along very quickly. It's going to be completely ready by the end of March. And all for the last so many months after filming finished in October, it was always planned that immediately after Master's birthday, for a few days, Shivani, who's the the producer something or another, Santoshi, who's the producer something or another. The film world is very, very exact. So but I just don't know what it's called. And I, who have various titles, my official title is Content Coordinator. My personal title is Priestess of Dogma. Which not everyone on the set knew was a joke, so I had to sort of work it out a little after a while. They were just paranoid that, I was going to declare that if they went on that way, they would all go to hell. So we had to work that out. But in any way, the three of us, plus the director, plus various others, a few others, very few others, went for what's known as the first screening of the director's cut of this movie. It's been an incredibly huge operation, a real combination of really high-level, highly skilled, very experienced filmmaking professionals, and the three of us, plus the rest of Ananda and Swami, but just sort of working in cooperation. It's very similar, actually, to when we were in litigation all those years, because we had really high-level lawyers who understood that world, and then we had us who understood our world, and we were trying to make a marriage of them, and that's what this has been about. There was a mix-up on my flight, and I ended up having to take a taxi from LAX to the Ananda Ashram, and just for the fun of it, I said, "Oh yeah, I'm here on business, working on a film." The taxi driver was totally unimpressed, but I had a lot of fun in the back seat, just like this is like a world we don't know anything about. Well, to cut to the chase, which is what you all want to know, the movie came out better than we could ever have imagined. Really, it's just gorgeous. Yeah, hooray, hooray, hooray. And this is only the director's cut. They keep it really tight under wraps because, we've gone one past that because it's not finished and there's so many things that have to be polished. The ordinary human is inclined to criticize things that the people in the business know are just works in progress. But it was quite an experience. When we're in this screening room, we're at the Dick Clark screening room. This is this whole world, of course. I remember many years ago when David and I were on a lecture tour and we went to Houston, Texas. And because we had a little time free, we went to NASA and went to the campus, a huge campus of NASA where they do the spaceship. It was very interesting. As soon as we stepped on the property, I realized I had entered somebody else's karmic group. It was totally not my karmic group. I mean, zero do I understand that. But it was such a collective of people who had clearly worked together in the astral world and for many lifetimes before and came down to do something very specific. And it was really fun sort of to walk around in their universe, which just, we have our universe exactly the same, our karmic group, and they have theirs, and the whole Hollywood scene is its own universe down there. We now have our little family in the midst of it, our businessman, our big overall producer, and it's really totally fun. So we sit in the screening room in the big soft leather chairs, like this, and it's about a dozen seats, and it's a fairly big screen because you want to see it on a big screen. As soon as it started, and the soundtrack is still hugely a work in progress, you have to finish a film completely, and then they do the music literally frame by frame. And it will be Swami's melodies, but it will have to be composed and arranged so it really fits. But what we had now was, you might call it background music. It was just Swami's music, but not really refined. But it just starts. And in that, just within almost a few seconds, I could feel this, this purity and a certain innocence that was just deeply touching to me. And I had two intuitions. If my intuitions prove true, then we'll be able to all point back at them and say, yes, she knew. And if not, we'll just say these are speculations. But as soon as it came on, I had this feeling that two things were going to happen. This movie is going to get terrible reviews from some people because it's so pure, it's so innocent, it's so filled with faith, it's so optimistic. It's not really what so many people in the world can even relate to. And simultaneously, it's going to touch the hearts of many, many. And I had this picture of like 5 people go to the movie. 2 of them weep through the whole thing. The other 3 come out and said, boy, was that a waste of money. And the 2 who really liked it are not going to quite know what to do, to admit how they can be touched by something so childlike and sweet. At the same time, I was saying to someone on the phone, we really made a movie about us and it's great. And he said, because we're great or because the movie is great? I said, well, honestly, a little bit of both. It just puts across what we actually are. And what we actually are is an integrated reality between matter and spirit that doesn't really have to commit itself with great sort of fanaticism to anything in particular. Because we are a reality that lives at the center and behaves appropriately. When practical efficiency is required, we're perfectly willing to do it. When divine faith is required, we're perfectly willing to do it. And we don't have to make a point of any of them. So the whole movie is very understated. And God and Guru and meditation and faith in God and the power of God is just woven all the way through it, but only occasionally spoken. Just in the same way that we live. We don't walk around all the time saying to each other, I believe in this, I believe in that, you should believe in this, you should believe in that. But whenever it is necessary, whenever it's appropriate, whenever it's the way in which we strengthen ourselves or explain what we're doing, naturally we express it. And so all of that runs through it. There's another factor about it, and all of these things, of course, are about you, us, is that Swami Kriyananda is there. He's at the beginning and the end, but the movie is carried enormously by everyone who's dedicated their life to what he has taught us. One very perceptive viewer, completely outside of our Ananda family, said, but you feel him all the way through it. Because the consciousness that comes across is what everyone is expressing. And that's exactly what the spiritual path is. It's not about, your religion is not something you wear or put on the outside. It's the light you have in your heart. And for devotees and disciples, that light is the light of dedication and the light of attunement. Just on a very practical matter, Shivani has contracted with a very sophisticated, experienced promotion team, distribution team, a woman who has her own company. It's her second-generation company of global film distribution. And she's a solid businesswoman, very solid, an Israeli businesswoman. She doesn't do yoga, she doesn't meditate, she doesn't have a particular spiritual practice. She's an open-minded, highly intelligent, very effective LA person. She's like our perfect demographic. She's a great lady, very dynamic lady. All conversation about this movie had been theoretical, and a whole plan had been created on the theory of what this movie would be. Finally, she saw the movie, the early cut like this. The next day, they had a meeting. She took all the plans off the table. She said, this movie has a market that I never imagined it was going to have. She said, I think we can sell this movie to a major distributor right from the get-go. Now here's the interesting part of this, and this is, how I'm also trying to give a sermon here today and not just give a news report. I I've been part of Ananda for so many years, and every time Swamiji creates a new initiative, from the start, he has told us that this is going to be the one that's going to ignite the world. You know, this book is going to be a bestseller. This method is going to just really put us on the map. This is going to get everyone interested in Master. And I've given talks up here. You've heard me talk about magnetism and what I've learned from all of that. What was amazing, it has been amazing in this last week, that no matter, now these are not us. You know, this woman is a businesswoman. She won't even accept a movie she doesn't feel she can promote. And she's definitely not going to set up a business plan just to be nice. And she suddenly has this completely different concept. I feel, yeah, sure. After all these years of it never quite coming about, well, the word actually is appalled to realize the degree to which a certain kind of skepticism has crept into my own heart. Even though I myself actually think that this film is going to have people are just going to like it. This is what the people say, the complete outsiders, the handful who've seen it. It's so interesting. It's just really interesting. And I said to the promotions lady, I said, well, we've always thought we were enormously interesting, but nobody's ever cared. So, and she sort of laughed, and she said, well, I just found it totally interesting. In fact, she said her greatest desire was to just get in a car and drive up to Ananda Village. And her husband, who's also part of the business side of this, just was astonished because it's not her. It's not like this is what she would usually do. Now, isn't it interesting, though? Just like, well, if it happens, it happens. It's not like we're here for popularity, but I do think we have a message. She also said, just to finish, it's the age of documentaries, reality television. People want true stories. This is a time when people really want true stories. It's just we're hitting the right moment. Oddly enough, our timing is maybe right this time. And I've felt this before. This was actually our picture of this. Shivani and I were talking about this. 40 years ago, when Ananda started, a very small group of young idealists, we have all these phrases now, a group of young idealists really felt that the world was going in a direction that we didn't want to go. And Swami, inspired and empowered by Swami Kriyananda, we just stepped outside of what was happening and started building an alternate universe with schools and meditation as a practice, with yoga, with cooperation, with living close to the land, the long, long list of all these different things. And just for 4 decades, we've just been, working on this. Raising children, getting into the second generation of children, even the third, just sort of quietly building it until it's way past a theory. It's clearly that this is how it works, and on the faces of all the people in the film, you see the fruit of it. I mean, the faces are just so beautiful. Just all the people you know, but so beautiful. And at the same time that this has been happening, society's been rolling along, and rising and falling and rising and falling, and lately, kind of getting more and more chaotic, more violence, more terrible crimes, more young people going out of their minds, more economic stress, more global stress, more corruption like this. So these two forces have been happening. And as our society gets less secure, two realities have come up. People have gotten more and more cynical, but also some people are now reaching for the light. Because unfortunately, as we all know, sometimes we only reach for the light when the darkness becomes unbearable. And that's why Master said that economic and other difficulties will come, not to punish us, but to awaken us. So a real solution is building on this side, and a greater and greater need for that solution is building on this side, and also a greater and greater openness to it. And we may just be standing at the right place at the right time, when those two realities come forward. So it's going to be very interesting this next year, whether this comes through, how this comes through, what exactly is going to happen. Now, all of this, the catalyst, besides just needing to tell you, because it's a very important story, because it may well happen within, if it is released by a major distributor, if our promotion person's perception of it is valid. It'll come out in September or October of next year. You'll get to see it sooner. When it's completely ready, we all agreed, all of us get to see it. It's our movie, we get to see it earlier. So we'll get to see it earlier. Nobody gets to see it until it's finished, hardly anybody. But we'll all get to see it earlier. But we may really suddenly be standing in something that people think is impressive to be part of. Wouldn't that be an unusual experience? I'm so comfortable being in the lunatic fringe. I really don't know how to come in from the cold. But the part of it that's interesting to me, and this is what I'm going to go back to, was the reason, whatever it is, why I'm holding on to a certain amount of cynicism. I'm usually not like that. David and I have joked in our lives because all of you who've been married for more than a week, understand how you kind of work out the dynamic of your relationship and you gradually figure out how the harmonies of it work. David, as you well know, is a very thoughtful person, and thank God he's like that. I'm a really quick person. I am what they call in marketing an early adapter. It's not that I adapt to products, but when I get an idea that looks interesting to me, I pretty much seize it right away. And more than that, I not only adapt it myself, I run to the front of the line and see if I can help take the line wherever it's going. David is more considered about things, and he'll thoughtfully think about where it's going to go and what he's going to do, and he'll move to the middle or the back of the line, and he'll just sort of watch to see what's going to happen. Then when he commits completely. I, of course, am often leading us and me off a cliff periodically. And thank God for the combination, or else I don't think we'd be sitting here. We'd probably still be in the storefront over on California Avenue. So it's very interesting for me to see in my heart, despite my own intuition, despite my artistic perception of this, despite my faith in Swami, despite the fact even that I know that in the life of many, many great souls, historically, recognition doesn't come till the very end of their life. It's perfect timing for Swamiji, for his life work to be noticed. If your life work is noticed too early, you get distracted. First you have to do it, because the masters don't come for the recognition. They come to plant the vibration. And the relationship that you see between Swami Kriyananda and Master was the relationship that was also there when he was William the Conqueror and Swami was Henry I. It's when the Master has the power to break through and define what's supposed to happen, and then the disciples move it forward. And they do that because the Master can't, rarely can a Master bring his mind down to the nuts and bolts of it. And also it's for the disciples to grow. Swamiji writes that about why does a Master's work need editing? Because editing is a mundane task. The inspiration of the ideas is done by the Master, and then to put them carefully into exactly the right words, it helps the disciples' consciousness to be able to do that. And so here we are, Swamiji's set this extraordinary body of work in motion, and here's a factor that I've heard Swamiji speak of recently that I've reflected on from this same point of view of cynicism versus innocence, which was my perception as soon as that movie came on the screen. Cynicism versus purity and innocence. That's the reality that this movie is going to cut a swath through that. And then again, is just to make it clear, realizing the extent to which I, myself, had fallen a little bit onto the cynical side. Now, let me just a second, I've lost my thought here for a second. Oh yes, Swamiji has been saying sometimes lately, I just want to awaken everyone to God. I want everyone in the world to understand how wonderful these teachings are. He says it with total enthusiasm. Then he says, I admit it's not likely, but I want to keep on trying. And when you look at his life's work, that's what you see. Oh, people need books on leadership. Let me just write a book about leadership. People are so worried about their money. How about a book on money magnetism? Everybody wants human love. Here's a book about marriage. Naturally, we have to raise our children. Here's a book about education. Just from angle after angle. What about institutional religion? What about healing? What about friendship? Just all these 140 books that he's written. Where would that enthusiasm come from? Except this deeply held belief that God is for everyone. That's the book that he's also written with that title on it. God is for everyone. Now, part of it is that deeply held belief allows him to commit his energy without reservation. He doesn't commit his energy with the belief that maybe this will work or maybe it won't. Yeah, sure, maybe this will happen, maybe it won't happen. I mean, how well can you do any artistic project if at the same time that you're working on it, you're convinced that nobody's going to care? I know when I was working on the book about Swami Kriyananda, the book of stories, one of the reasons I had so much trouble the first 4 years I spent trying to write that book without success, before the 1 year when I actually did, is even as I would write it, I would think about the people who wouldn't like it. And so I was always arguing, and they were always winning. I mean, among the many things that I had difficulty with, that was one of them. I didn't believe in my own story. I was always thinking about the people who would reject my story. Well, how can we live as devotees if at the same time that we are embracing this, we are doubting it? Yes, we have to behave appropriately. Yes, we're not fanatics, but don't even worry about that. Swamiji has a deeply held belief that God is for everyone, and he's just going to keep writing one more book from one more angle, from one more perspective, to awaken one more person that might be possible. Now, of course, in addition to what it might do for others, look what it does for the person who's doing it. Because there's always this creative openness, this creative belief. Instead of thinking, oh, they're just closed to it, they're not going to want it, oh, these people they're not my people, I'm just going to ignore them. It's like, how can I touch the heart of this one? How can I touch the heart of that one? How can I take this fabulous joy and life experience that I have and give it to just one more soul? Because that's the power within us, too, of self-transformation. Because the more we behave from that point of view, with that level of commitment, the closer we are to the actual vibration of God himself. God is everything. And I'm going to actually bring this back to our reading today. Because that's what the reading is. God became the entire universe. And he writes in there, and in the expanded commentary, something very interesting. He said, it's perfectly enjoyable, it's perfectly appropriate to enjoy God in a beautiful sunset, to enjoy God in the soft rain, in a beautiful flower. I was looking at these beautiful roses here today, and just the colors on the altar, and it's all so intoxicating. But he said, the error comes when instead of realizing that it's God's beauty that's coming through and that's what you're feeling, you begin to think that the thing itself is the source of the power. And that's why it matters, did God become the universe? Because if God became the universe, we love everything as a manifestation of the divine. And if we love everything, and this is what Swamiji was writing, he said, you can't just love things because they're beautiful. He said, because God is equally present in the ugly. That's a very challenging thought for the mind, isn't it? Because if God became everything, where do you draw the line? So what was that ugly thing made out of? And who made it? It had to have been made by the one source. So it's just only a slightly twisted manifestation at this point. And if it could just be straightened out, whether you're cleaning up the messy area, or you're removing the barnacle of fear from the heart of a human being that causes him to behave in a way that is not reflective of the divine beauty, or if you're extricating it from your own heart. And we will not, and we cannot, have the kind of power that we need to have to be actual instruments of God, unless we wholeheartedly believe that this is possible. And so even my little cynicism, my little practical, oh yeah, attitude, it's a great spiritual flaw. And it's not because God is going to be mad at me, but because I'm going to have to live in that. I was amused recently to watch a karmic cycle that's about a 20-year cycle. A friend of mine spent a certain amount of his life being pretty critical, and now suddenly finds himself in a position where, what a surprise, other people are criticizing him. And I thought to myself, I haven't yet had the nerve to say it, where did you think all that criticism that you were offering out was going? You know, did you think you were just going to just toss it out into the ether and you would never have to see it again? Like you recycled it and it went out into a barge into the middle of the ocean somewhere? Whatever we are, we experience. And we're always behaving badly and then really surprised when other people behave badly toward us. I've had so much fun lately enjoying. I was trying to help someone through a complicated situation, and they were all mad about so-and-so did this, and they shouldn't have, and it wasn't right, and they should have done it like this. And I said, well, let's just for a moment pretend that I'm not talking to you, but I'm talking to the person you're talking about. How do you think they would explain the situation to me? Because we were talking about a perfectly good person. From their point of view, how do you think that whole thing looks to them? In other words, when we stand in our own reality, we are all manifestations of God. By no means is there such a thing as, what could I say, more or less perfect manifestations of God. It's not like we're always perfect. But once we understand in our essence that this whole world is divine, and the more powerfully we utterly commit ourselves to that, the more likely we are both to be instruments of that, to be successful in our lives, to manifest our ideals, and to actually do some good work in this world. Master was just exactly like this. He wrote the Bhagavad Gita commentary. He said to Swami Kriyananda, a new scripture has been born. Millions will find God through this book. I know, I have seen it. That book wasn't even published for 40 years. And when it was finally published, it bore very little resemblance to that book. Swami Kriyananda had to write the book he feels that was the one Master wanted to be written. But when Master declared that, and then it didn't happen, then people around him, well, you know, he's got that sort of way and he thinks like this. And who's more correct? The one who sees the potential of the power of light infinitely to touch the hearts of all and move this world, or the one who's always going to be, and I love this word of Swami's, factual. I remember standing up here and saying to you all when Swami said to me, he accused me once of being somewhat negative. Negative, sir, I'm such a positive person. Oh yes, he said, but you insist sometimes on being so factual. You see, life happens on many levels. This world is only a manifestation of God. Every one of us is equally loved. Every one of us has that same power, both to receive, to give, to be a channel, to realize. There's no limitation to any of it, except that we hold ourselves in these small patterns. And when we hold ourselves in these small patterns, one thing happens. God weeps. Master weeps. Sometimes when some of the disciples who were there with Master in his ashram decided that they would go to another master here, or they would go off and become famous in this way, or rich in that way, or indulgent in this way, Master would weep because he knew they would eventually come back. But oh, having come so close, why condemn yourself to more lifetimes of misunderstanding? And even if they didn't know what they were doing, he did. Oh, so sweet. It's so sweet. It's so sweet. The closer we come to that, the more that lives in our heart. The more bliss we have, the more we are doing what we came to do. God bless you all.